Hey everybody, this is Tony UV, CEO at VerSprite. I'm here rocking my LastCon 2023 shirt that I got from the fine people in Austin, Texas, the organizers for LastCon. Always a great conference, shout out to them. But today I'm here to talk about, of course, more threat modeling and address a very common question that I get all the time when I travel to different conferences, which is, what is the main difference between Pasta and Stride? So let's go ahead and dive in. You might be getting into threat modeling and you might be wondering, where do I go? Which one do I use in terms of an approach? First of all, it's really important to mention that you have to find an approach that fits well for you and the applications that you're trying to threat model if you're diving into threat modeling. Let's first talk about Stride and some of the benefits, because Stride has been around for a while and it was adopted by Microsoft around the 1990s to be able to be a simplistic way to quickly build some aspects of security into design. And so it came up with this mnemonic. It's not a methodology, right? A methodology in the true sense of the word gives you an approach, pretty detailed procedures, maybe some examples. It's simply, basically an acronym to simplify 6 threat categorizations, which are spoofing, tampering of data, repudiation, information disclosure, and denial of service, elevation of privileges. So let's start. Pros of Stride. And there's several. So if you want to dive into threat modeling and you've never done threat modeling before, easy to use, for sure. 6 threat categorization buckets. And the idea is that you're an architect or you're developing an application for the first time. You're wondering, what should I do about security threats that are out there? And so Stride is easy because you have to ask yourself from your application model across your different application layers, or maybe your trust boundaries within your application layers. Where do I have opportunities for an application actor, or a service account, an identity of some sort to be actually spoofed? Right, spoofing happens a lot in abuse cases in application security. So definitely it's good for developers and architects to consider, where can this actually happen in my application model? So again, simple to use. And the idea is that as you go through these exercises, when you're writing or building applications or designing applications, that you are thinking about these sort of threat categorizations. Let's go through another example. Another one that's pretty nefarious is elevation of privileges, right? So it happens a lot when you're a developer with a functional mindset. You're really thinking about features that you're trying to build out of your backlog, and you're not necessarily thinking about what could go wrong with the associated security context or privileges that are awarded to an actor in my application that is making a call to, let's say, an API endpoint. If the privileges are to be escalated, maybe they have more than just simply read privileges. Maybe they have update and create privileges. So in the last acronym, or the letter of Stride, elevation of privileges, you want to basically make sure that you have access levels that are appropriately set for your application model. Here's an example. So let's say that you are building an application that's a financial application, and you have to be able to interface with an API that's going to pull back, like in the United States, we have, LIBOR rates, which are typically used, in the mortgage business, so that you can set a certain baseline of rates, and then maybe the mortgage company adds 2 or 3 points on top of that. So if it's just a read function, you probably wouldn't want to design your application to have an elevated privilege model where it interfaces with that backend, right, and pulls the LIBOR rates. But in addition, it could maybe drop tables or add tables, or maybe taint the data, update the values, stuff like that. So again, going back to Stride, it's a simple way when you look through these 6 categorizations to say, what do I need to do? Very easy to use. If you're getting into threat modeling, definitely a good first stepping stone, if you will, into the art of threat modeling. Now let's talk about Pasta. Pasta is a true methodology. Pasta was invented by myself and Marco Marana. We're both OWASP leaders internationally. At the time, he was a senior leader at a multinational bank, and I am the founder and CEO of VerSprite. But I port 27 years of IT and IS experience. So a lot of the foundational concepts of PASTA and the different stages lens from both of our experiences as both consultants, as professionals in the industry for a long time. PASTA is an acronym that stands for the process for attack simulation and threat analysis. So let's start there. So one key differentiator between PASTA and Stride is that PASTA really encourages you to think more nefariously. Now, let's take a step back. If you're just looking at this video and maybe you're starting out in information security, there's a lot of things that are thrown at you. Frameworks, compliance, acronyms, and a lot of it, is well intended. Frameworks are great. You have a lot of great frameworks and control frameworks that are out there. But does it really make you think like a criminal? And what is the importance of that, right? In order to kind of draw a correlation to other industries that are dealing with maybe physical crime, oftentimes, those more traditional industries that predate AppSec, cybersecurity, InfoSec, whatever you want to call it, they basically do try to understand criminal intent, motive, and things like that, other types of threat attribution. So it's important to be able to, when Marco and I came up with this process, there was a couple different goals we had. One was to prove that there was an issue or a problem, and to prove it by emulating kind of a criminal intent and substantiating that criminal intent with evidence. So we'll get into that in a second. But, that's a major differentiator, is that the process for attack simulation and threat analysis is really not meant to be like here is a easy, 6 buckets of threats that I'm going to use in 1993 or 1990. And it's 2023 and I'm going to use the same thing. It doesn't make any rational sense. It doesn't make any intellectual sense. It is easy, absolutely. But threats change and evolve, and you cannot have the same 6 buckets be immutable over time against an application model. You simply cannot, because as your threats change, you're going to be trying to fit a square peg into a round hole going into 2030, 2040, and so on and so forth. So the mindset, it's a true methodology. Number one differentiator, there's for every stage in PASTA, and there's 7, you have activities to do, right? And there's inputs and there's outputs. So it's very different, from Stride, where it's not a process. It's simply 6 categorization buckets. And again, easy to use, easy to understand, quick way of, considering security into your application model. Another key differentiator, so beyond PASTA being a methodology, beyond PASTA thinking more about, let me look at my application from an attacker's lens, it's about substantiating that you have a problem. And that's why it's known as the only risk-centric threat modeling methodology out there. And so in order to call something risky, and in security, and again, I've been in the industry for quite some time, a lot of people throw a lot of different risk-related words, risk appetite, right? Residual risk, inherent risk. There's all these risk terms. What does it mean? To simplify something, to call something risky, you have to care about it, right? Just from a personal level, like if there's something that you're trying to protect and you really don't care if you lose it, or if it's very cheap and easily replaceable, you probably won't be putting too much effort into protecting it. This is, again, very rational and also very, it's a common sense, basically, right? So the risk-centric approach in doing threat modeling was an approach that was inspired by ballistic threat modeling, and looking at what sort of threats are likely to happen. If they were to happen, going to cause the biggest impact, so that I can prioritize what I need to do in my application model. I've been a former developer, and one of the major complaints that now as a security professional, talking to developers they have is they say, just tell me what I need to know, and tell me what I need to prioritize. In security operations, oftentimes developers are given lists and lists and lists of things to fix in their code, and their environment and their design. So the list gets big and sometimes literally gets into the thousands, right? Because companies are using a lot of tools, and those tools can get a little bit chatty. So how do you prioritize that? Well, Pasta provides a way so that you can prioritize what is likely to happen, right? It's a risk-centric approach. So it wants to prove what is likely to happen in my application model. How can I substantiate that, right? I don't want to fear-monger my audience, my application owners, my product owners. I want to substantiate and create some level of credibility with information. And Pasta does that along the way. So in stage 4, for example, of Pasta is threat analysis. So we are doing threat modeling. Let's sit on that term for a second. Threat modeling, modeling of threats. Where do we get threats to be, if I'm using Stride for my application in 1995, and I look at that same application in 2005, and then in 2015, I'm still using spoofing, tampering of data, repudiation, information disclosure, right? You get it. It's the same thing. It doesn't change. So it's common sense. It's like threats change, attack patterns change, and attacks, you want to be able to have a correlation of threats that are happening today, 2023, tomorrow, 2024, so on, that are supporting threat motives. So in stage 4 of Pasta is called threat analysis. What you do is the goal of that stage is to create your organic threat library. But basically, a threat library is a list of threat assertions that say these are the possible threats against my application that are supported by 2 major areas. 1 is threat data, and 2 is threat intel. So threat data in a application environment, let's say for a big bank or for a major retail company, you have a lot of, you have an environment to which your application is running. Maybe it's running in the cloud. Maybe it's running on-prem. Maybe it's making interfaces with key partners that are providing content and information for your application model that's needed. So there's things in your application environment like web application firewalls, IPS, IDS, EDR nodes in a virtual cloud, environment. There's infrastructure security logging systems in all the 3 major CSPs, right? Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and they're all receiving events, security events. So correlating those events and asking your operation team members to say, hey, I'm concerned about, let's say, denial of service, or I'm concerned about persistence, right? Persistence, as an example, as a threat, it's not something that you can fit into Stride, right? So it's an example where you want to be able to look at your application model and think about what are the types of unique threats to your application, right? That may not be the same to the other retail application that's out there on an e-commerce website. But threat data is all the alerts that your security operations team is already looking at. They might have a security incident event management solution, a SIM, and they can do all types of searches to see what sort of threats are related to different types of wares that have been identified in the environment, malware, ransomware, etc., Trojans and Trojan horses and stuff like that, or other types of things that align again to your threat library. In retail, e-commerce, you might develop a simplistic threat library of, I'm concerned about information disclosure for my loyalty aspect. Retail's companies have loyalty applications or loyalty features because they want to know how often their customers are buying their products. So there's a lot of PII there, right? A lot of personal information. So I want to know from my security operations team what sort of actual events are correlated to possible information disclosure, right? So you build a custom threat library, but you substantiate it right there. Even if you use information disclosure, which is a threat categorization in Stride, you're not substantiating it. So that's major difference number 3. How are you substantiating your threat model using Stride? It's not a methodology, so it doesn't really tell you how or why. So with PASTA, stage 4, it says, go and knock on the door of your security ops and tell them, I'm interested in these types of events. I'm really summarizing a lot here, but let's look at the other side of the coin there for substantiating threat, and that's threat intel. Now, if you are more of a mid-level career individual doing threat modeling, or maybe you've been around for a minute in the industry, you can appreciate the fact that most threat intel feeds that are going into an organization, and there's companies that are buying threat intel feeds or getting free ones, it's difficult for them to operationalize that threat intel into their environment. And what does that mean exactly? What that means is that they're paying for intel that they can't correlate to an application that is doing, let's say, running a loyalty app, to stick with the retail example. In that loyalty app, there's a tech stack, or there's a quote attack surface, right? That's running. Today, it's very difficult for a lot of places that they're not right now operationalizing that threat intel into those environments. But with PASTA's saying, listen, go to your threat intel sources that, again, your ops team members are already paying for. And it's not about the threat modeler going out to do that. Oftentimes when I'm a leader for OWASP in Atlanta and have been for the past 18 years, when I talk to other OWASP leaders globally, they have this misconception that, oh, wow, you're asking this security champion to go out there and go find security event information and go find pen test information and go find vulnerability information and correlate it to your threat model. No, that's not the case. What you're doing is, for the first time, unlike any other activity, risk-centric threat modeling is actually embellishing existing processes and workflows of pen testing, of threat intel harvesting, of security, operations, event and log monitoring, all these different silos, in saying, please feed my threat model, but with these parameters, right? So the security champion is not doing the work. It's literally just like, here is a request with these conditions, please feed me. They might come up with nothing. So there is that major difference there, is that PASTA provides an opportunity. Oftentimes, when you see there's an increased demand for threat modeling by government, by regulation, in the private sector, and the last thing that the technology customers of security groups need, or the business customers of security groups need, is yet another thing to be liable for. They're already having to address the gaps in pen testing and vulnerability management and what the software composition tools say, and et cetera, audit requirements beyond belief. Some companies are audited literally 12 months out of the year. So to add on, hey, let's do threat modeling. Let's do, try to incorporate this into, secure by design principles, which is good. It's all good. The major fourth difference here between PASTA and Stride is that Stride oftentimes is used as a add-on. In addition to doing yada, yada, yada security, let me add on threat modeling. PASTA says, let me contextualize what you're doing in security into a model of threats. It basically is contextualizing for your internal customers. If you're working at a multinational corporation in any industry, energy, transportation, banking, finance, healthcare, it does not matter. You're contextualizing your information, of security information, into your model of threats for your internal customers. So that, what does the pen test results mean? What does the vuln results mean? Well, in the context of the application that you're threat modeling, it means that you are substantiating your threat of, I'm concerned about persistence. Well, what types of vulnerabilities affecting my components in my application model could lead to persistence? What types of exploits done in my pen testing, my manual pen testing, exemplify the possibilities, right, of that attack actually happening? And the last major difference, I would say, in terms of PASTA and Stride, and there's still more, is in the taxonomies of use. So again, Stride is easy and it's well intended. But there's a lot of misuse of the word attack and threat. If you look in the English dictionary, really anything, language dictionary, if you translate, the word threat to, French and to Spanish and to Italian, insert language, you see it's the possibility of something, harmful to happen, versus an attack is the actual means and ways in which, something is happening, right? So it's, we oftentimes, because we want to be able to do things more easily in security, we kind of conflate these two terms, but they're different. So in threat modeling with PASTA, what it says is that I have these hypotheses on threats or threat assertions, and I want to be able to map it to the industry taxonomies that are out there, right? Vulnerability, attack patterns, post-exploitation attack patterns, countermeasures, right? Weaknesses, not necessarily in that order because I kind of went out of order there, but it provides this hierarchical tree representation, which is called an attack tree, where the parent node becomes the threat. And this is something that attack trees are not specific to the process for attack simulation and threat analysis, but the way in which they're rendered and the way in which, most importantly, threats are categorized as compared to attacks is very different between PASTA and other methodologies, approaches like Stride. Hopefully this was helpful, but those are some of the top differences between Stride and PASTA. For more information on PASTA, download the free ebook. And for more detailed videos on the process for attack simulation and threat analysis, please visit the other videos under the VerSprite YouTube channel. Hopefully this was beneficial. If you if you have some questions, if you have some comments, please list them below. I always love to engage with the community on these sort of things. And looking forward to the next one. Take care, everybody.